It was hailed as a victory for environmentalists in Hawaii. The nomination of Carleton Ching to head the Department of Land and Natural Resources was withdrawn by Governor David Ige right before the final Senate vote, after weeks of controversy. The nomination of the candidate, who has an extensive background in development, incited a public backlash and ended up being a telling first test for the new administration of Governor David Ige. In this feature story, Puna Senator Russell Ruderman, who played a big role in the legislative process to confirm the nominee, shares his perspective on the tumultuous political saga. Speaking to us from his Island Naturals store in Pahoa, Ruderman, in his own words, walked us through the story from beginning to end.
As I recall, the nomination was announced on a Friday afternoon. I started realizing the concern as a result of some Facebook posts and a petition that had been started over the weekend, raising the concerns over who it was, which was really a real estate developer lobbyist appointed to head the Department of Land and Natural Resources. I credit social media for a lot of the success of recent political actions. It raised a lot of awareness very quickly. People were starting to talk about it on that Monday morning. We didn't realize what a big story it would become at that point. And Carleton Ching, the nominee, was going around introducing himself to people. And because the way this works, the relevant committee interviews the nominee, questions them at length, and recommends whether the whole Senate confirms him or not. Now, I happen to be on that committee. That's the Water Land Committee. So I was on the committee that was charged with making a recommendation on this nomination. So perhaps because of that, Mr. Ching came to seek me out at first, and I sat down with him that very first morning. It was that Monday morning, and spent an hour and a half talking to him. And I mean, he's a nice enough guy, likable guy. It's hard not to like him. He's a good guy. And I kept asking him, "Can you please tell me why you're suitable for this appointment?" He didn't understand the very first thing about environmental preservation, or why we should preserve the environment, or why we should conserve our natural resources for future generations. In his mind, a piece of property, if it's not being developed, then it ought to be sold to someone who's going to develop it. That's basically his worldview, and it was very disturbing to think that someone like that would be put in charge of the DLNR.
Ultimately, it was my decision to select Carleton Ching for nomination to this position. We interviewed a number of candidates.
And our governor said, well, he's got a great management experience, and that's really all we need. He can learn the other stuff.
I think Carleton has the integrity and management experience to really help us do that.
But his management experience, to my eyes, is very limited, very modest.
Most important, he definitely is committed to assure that these resources, historic, natural, cultural, are really protected for the future and future generations.
And doesn't in any way make up for a lack of knowledge about conservation, either the law or the spirit of conservation.
The conversations that I've had with Carleton give me full hope and belief that he is the best person to do this job. I know that he understands that if you give him the privilege for serving as the director of this department and chair of the Board of Land and Natural Resources, that he will make all of us proud.
In terms of testimony to the committee, we had in front of us about 800 pieces of testimony. These aren't form letters or petitions opposing, about 200 in favor. Most of the ones in favor came from the development community, which to me was as big a concern as the opposition, because if the development community thinks this is a good choice, that worries me. There was also a petition with, at that point, 8,000 signatures. I mentioned it had 1,000 by the first Monday. It was up to 8,000. And in both of these cases, this is unprecedented opposition.
Can you live in the new culture and actually kind of be faithful to it in a way?
Yes, I can. The mission statement is clear. Especially if it's state land held in trust for all of us, it's clear what we have to do.
A couple of things the nominee said in his, as we questioned him and we gave him a chance to talk. He constantly referred to land as a piece of dirt.
You're selling this piece of dirt to an investor from New Jersey.
He said, if you have a piece of dirt and you're not using it, you should sell it to someone else that uses it. He often referred to the balance point or the sweet spot. It's like, well, if there's conflicting interests, then you split it down the middle.
Do you think it's important to prevent extinctions?
Oh, by all means, yes.
Why?
To figure out which ones are the priorities to save. They have to be saved.
To me, as a biologist, it's like there aren't any unimportant species. We should fight tooth and nail to save every species. Another thing he kept referring to when people asked him about what's the reason to preserve our environment, he'd refer to our brand, Hawaii's brand. You know, people come here for the beauty. And so all three of those things really reflect a developer's viewpoint very fundamentally.
So just up until January of 2015, you were not aware of the public trust doctrine?
I was aware of it generally, but not in the detail they wanted me to respond to.
He didn't understand the whole idea of the public trust doctrine or, you know, the fundamentals of the laws under which it operates.
During that time of your tenure on the Land Use Research Foundation,
the chair of the Water and Land Committee was Senator Laura Thielen, who was a former director of DLNR. She's also an attorney, a very smart, well-spoken woman. So she was extremely qualified to ask him questions, and she really pointed out ways in which he was lacking in a fundamental understanding.
So over this period that the public was having the debate about the Public Land Development Corporation, that took place over the course of about a year.
PLDC was a remarkable outcry from the public.
I'm going to make it real easy for you.
Over the idea that we should use our public lands to make money.
Thank you.
I will not have a dictator agency in this stupid state.
And we should remove any of the laws that help to preserve them. We should basically allow a railroading of development to raise money.
Where, in what universe, do we need a corporation to handle the land for the people?
And there was a huge outcry because people feel like that's not what our public lands are for.
These guys gonna be their own bosses and do what they like with our lands. Lands that belong to you, your children, your grandchildren, and our future generations to come.
These are not the state of Hawaii's lands. They're held in trust. The state is a trustee. They're not the owner. So to make an agreement with a private corporation that exempts me from using that is taking me out of that public trust. And I believe there's an error in your thinking legally. And I think you should be very, very aware of this because I believe you could be held in breach of trust.
I have come to view that as a very good analogy in the end, because the same outcry from the public, we saw it again even larger in this situation, and it's actually for the exact same reasons. That's why I think it's a very good analogy.
You know, this is an important position, and I think that you just need to reconsider it.
Do not confirm this appointment of Carleton Ching.
Legislatively, I believe I now have the power, legislatively, to be able to act in concert with you.
The previous governor sort of dug in his heels and refused to respond to the pressure about PLDC, refused to recognize the legitimacy of the public outcry as long as possible.
And the Public Lands Development Corporation will allow us, I think, to synthesize, right, the development side of DLNR.
And spent a lot of political capital doing that, and he lost a lot of support over that.
I'd like to say that Governor Ige is not Neil Abercrombie, but he too can be a one-term governor. You know, I supported the governor, I put signs up for him, and many of us are very, very disappointed in him right now.
Our new governor was going down that same track, in my opinion. He didn't seem to understand how large the public outcry was, how meaningful it was, and how important that is to his constituency, the people who elected him. and also just the people of the state.
LERF was one of the few organizations that was testifying in public meeting after public meeting, rulemaking sessions in front of the Board of Land and Natural Resources and in front of the legislature to keep the Public Land Development Corporation. Why was that?
I guess it's to have what their mission talks about, reasonable, rational, equitable land use planning and legislation. Perhaps they felt that was reasonable and rational.
Well, again, LERF is, you are on the board of directors, so I don't think it's something that you can hold as arm's length.
She really brought out, with some of her questioning, how inappropriate the nomination was.
So again, Mr. Ching, this isn't a position that the executive director just walked into a hearing and took one time. This is over something like an 11, 12-month period with news story after news story, television, newspaper, huge public outcry on the fact that these developments are going to be exempt from all zoning and land use regulations, where LERF is repeatedly taking these positions. While you are a vice president of the organization, are you telling us that you're just completely unaware of what the executive director was doing over this period of time?
That's not what I meant. We knew LERF was taking that position, but we weren't monitoring. I wasn't monitoring it specifically. Councilor Cook didn't believe in it.
I'm not asking about Councilor Cook. You're on the board of directors of LERF. I'm asking about your position as a director of LERF.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's on all the boards I sit on is very macro.
The more he talked, the worse it sounded. The most dramatic point in my mind, she was asking him, was the beginning of the second day of testimony, of questioning, I'm sorry. And she asked him a question about what will he say to a conservation conference that's coming up soon.
But as your opportunity to be the spokesperson for the state of Hawaii, what would be, in speaking to this conference?
It's kind of a big deal. It's a worldwide conservation conference. And she was trying to feel him out on what will be your big message. How does Hawaii relate to conservation?
Madam Chair.
And about one sentence into his answer, the governor stood up and interrupted.
Madam Chair, I would just say that I would probably be the spokesperson on behalf of the people of Hawaii and everyone in this room. So, I mean, I don't quite understand what this question has to do with the confirmation. But, you know, I'd be happy to share some of the great work that we've been talking about.
And it was a surreal moment because, you know, we do have a separation of powers in our government. There's executive, judicial, and legislative. The executive branch nominates the person. It's written in the Constitution that the Senate will confirm the nominations. It was a completely appropriate question. It was very strange for the governor to be in the room and interrupt the proceedings. He knows very well the legislature's role in this process, and what it said was a few things. He was very worried about the confirmation, which is fine. But it also said the nominee's not capable of answering for himself. Let me defend him. Let me interrupt this questioning. And, you know, he is the governor. All we could do is let him speak and then say thank you and proceed. But
I appreciate your attention to the conference.
I think to everybody there, it was a very telling moment that the nominee was not able to answer questions for himself, and the governor was intruding himself in a place that it didn't belong, with all due respect. And I love David Ige, and I want him to succeed. And in my mind, in opposing this confirmation, it comes from my firm belief that the Ige administration would have been much more damaged by confirming this nomination than it would have been by somehow defeating the nomination. I think the defeat is temporary, will be forgotten about in a couple of months. If he was confirmed, it would have been a PLDC thing hanging around his neck for 4 years. And it would never have been forgotten.
I will be doing everything that I can to help him succeed.
So the governor did come and visit several of us senators in the context of trying to explain his support for the nominee. And, you know, there was some serious lobbying going on there. But one thing I want to make clear, there were some rumors going around that there was some heavy-handed carrot and stick approach here, or threats. And at no point did the governor even imply a threat or a reward in exchange for this vote. he never implied that I was going to lose something for my district if I opposed his nomination, or that I would get something as a quid pro quo if I supported it. And I'm not aware of him doing that to any other senators either. So even though I don't understand the governor's steadfast support for this nominee in face of all the opposition and in the face of most of us seeing how unqualified he was, at no point did he play dirty, in my opinion, and he retained his humanity and his fundamental fairness and his fundamental, he's a good person. He never turned into a different person than what he was over it. And I really respect him for that.
My name is Randy Awo. I'm here to submit oral testimony opposing this nomination.
The testifier that influenced me the most was a fellow named Randy Awo. It's A-W-O. And I had seen him in hearings over the last couple of years as I was on the Waterland Committee. He just recently retired.
I spent 32 years in state government, 27 of which has been with the DLNR with the Enforcement Division.
A very local guy, you know, Hawaiian guy. I'm sure he was born and raised. And he was able to speak because he just retired. And current employees can't do this.
Any kind of inference that these people are comprised of environmental activists suggesting that this is locals versus non-locals is irresponsible. Clearly, this movement is comprised of many people across the state of Hawaii, from many communities, and representing many ethnicities, as it should be. And while we don't agree on everything, when we're in the same room, we agree that this is a bad choice.
And I asked him a couple of questions. I said, have you had a similar concern about previous appointments to directors? He said, well, there's been concern sometimes, but nothing on this level. And he's never had that kind of concern. He's never seen a nominee to the director that was this wildly inappropriate. And he also confirmed something that I had learned in discussions, that the DLNR staff, although they can't speak, have tremendous concerns over this nomination. They were disheartened, they were demoralized, they didn't know what was going to happen. I fear if the confirmation had gone through, we would have lost a lot of our good people. We would demoralize a lot of the rest, and it would be a real problem for DLNR.
And so when we make these decisions, we have to decide based on what's in front of us. And what's in front of us is a clear conflict of the DLNR mission and a clear conflict of our interests.
I oppose this nomination because I will feel it will harm the future of our state. And if I feel that way, it's my job to rise above expedience and convenience and have the courage to do so.
To me, I quoted him rather extensively because I couldn't have said it better myself, plus he's the most qualified person we heard from.
I can find no better words to describe the situation than those of Mr. Randy Awo, who after 25 years serving in DLNR, culminating as head of DOCARE, the nominee's entire career track has been the polar opposite of DLNR's mission.
So I think that, at that point there was probably 2 or 3 other senators that felt pretty clear they were going to vote no out of concern for the environment, and honestly mostly out of concern for the strength of the opposition. I mean, we all answer to our voters, and when you're getting hundreds of calls against it, asking you to vote no. In my personal office, our email was 1,800 opposed, 22 in favor. The phone calls were about 28 to 2. So the number of no votes kept building. The nomination, in my opinion, should have been withdrawn at several points along the way, even before our committee hearing, but certainly afterwards. I mean, other nominations have been withdrawn with much, much less opposition. With 5, 6 people saying they'll vote no, I've seen nominations withdrawn. But it's kind of like a domino effect. More and more people said they were going to vote no. The day before the floor vote, it was just last Wednesday when we were going to vote on the Senate floor, I think there was 11 no votes the day before. On that very last evening, 2 other senators said they were going to vote no. They responded to concerns from their constituents, I think. They were hearing a lot from their constituents. So the morning of the vote, there were 13 no votes. And at that point, you know, we really had gotten a message. We were called into a recess where we got the message that says the governor's going to withdraw the nomination. We didn't know as we started our session would there be a vote with 13 no's, which is just embarrassing for both the nominee and the governor. But during the session we got a call, and the governor actually came down and spoke to the Senate caucus in private and said he'll be withdrawing the nomination.
Carleton Ching, gubernatorial nominee as chairperson of the Board of Land and Natural Resources.
So it never came to a vote on the floor, but that changed within the last hour.
I'm very disheartened by this action. I was hoping, since we had a full standing room only gallery, that the public would get the benefit of listening to our arguments, pro and con, on this governor's nomination. That has now been taken away. You know, we have several bills before this session of the legislature that have to do with bullying. I think what's transpired during the past week has been a good example of bullying and political pragmatism. I can speak about this because, as you know, I'm not part of any of the clubs that take place in the Senate. Heck, I wasn't even invited into the majority caucus. But I think that we're basing our decisions on politics and our electability rather than on what's right or what's wrong and what we should do.
In the end, the Big Island senators split 2 and 2, myself and Josh Green voting no. Josh Green was the first person to publicly say he'd vote no. He did it in a very strongly worded editorial early on. He was not on our committee, those of us on the committee waited to hear. He came out early against it, where Senators Kahele and Inouye were in favor of the nomination.
Support my colleague from Hawaii Kai. And though I did not have a chance to read my presentation today, but I will, because for those naysayers that are here today, I will support the man that I thought would be the right person for the right job.
It was curious that Senator Inouye gave her speech in favor even after the nomination was withdrawn.
40 years in which I have witnessed for and had direct involvement issues relevant to the Department of Land and Natural Resources.
It was a little bit surreal because there was no point to it. Those of us that were on the side that were opposing the nomination, we were committed to be graceful and polite about it. There wasn't any jumping up and down on the Senate floor or high-fiving I mean, really, there's a person in his family who got caught in this shuffle, and it was, I'm sure, very traumatic and hurtful to them, and we all cared about that. No one wanted to harm this individual.
Senator Green.
Madam President, may I just respectfully ask for a clarification? I wanted to know whether we were in the motion or another.
We are in discussion regarding the filing of this measure. So, Senator, if you can contain your remarks to the filing of this measure.
All right. I just wanted to say, in addition to my colleague from Hawaii Kai, why I support the nominee, Madam President.
Thank you.
And the illness that goes beyond, I think we need to stop this crazy cancer that's in the division of DLNR. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much.
I think it should have been withdrawn long before that point, but perhaps there was in the audience and in the environmental community, and I think that's justified because we don't have a lot of wins for the environmentalists in our world. We don't, and this was a big one. This was a big one in several ways. It didn't just prevent this guy from being head of DLNR, which who knows what would have happened. Probably it would have damaged our environment, but certainly it would have damaged the public trust in our government. But in addition, it shows for real the strength of the environmental community, and we can't be ignored. And the environmental community was very strong and very powerful in this little fight. And I consider it a coming of age point for us. It's like, well, anyone who wants to ignore us does so at their peril. And if you really can't see the value in environmentalism, at least see the political reasons to care about it. In that sense, it was a really, really big win. It was very meaningful in the same sense that repealing the PLDC was, but this was perhaps more focused and more all at once. And I think it was the environmental community flexing its muscles. And by the way, I think the leaders of several of the groups did a tremendous job. First of all, in speaking eloquently, in marshaling the troops, in effectively lobbying. You know, we got a lot of people to call and write their senators. They targeted the lobbying where it needed to be. It was a tremendously successful political movement. It was very encouraging to me. It's heartbreaking to me what happened to Governor Ige and Carleton Ching because it was unnecessary. It hurt them both a lot, in my opinion. I know the governor cared deeply about this, and I think he was hurt by it, both personally as well as politically. It's heartbreaking in a way, but the whole episode was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see this person who I supported and told everyone they could trust having a real blind spot towards the environment and towards what the mission of DLNR is. So that was very sad, not just on the day of the loss, but for the weeks leading up to it. It was really, really sad and disturbing to see that, to not be able to explain why this nomination is being stuck to in the face of completely not qualified and all the opposition in addition.